Traveling along the King's Road was far easier than being off the beaten track. The gift itself was amazing and so underused. Good land, fertile. There were more than enough trees to build homes and villages, and the sheer amount of rivers, lakes, and streams which littered the land made water a non-issue. Yet the place was deserted, almost devoid of life. Well, people anyway. There was plenty of life to be had, as Ghost had proved ever since they set off from Castle Black. The White Wolf was in his element out here. During the day he'd roam free far ahead of them. Every so often John would use his time to warg in the Ghost, and each time it was the same. He'd find that door wide open and welcoming, and inside he'd go. Seeing through the wolf's eyes was almost indescribable. He could see further, make things out more clearly, and when added to the other senses, his own felt inadequate. Sense would rise, and he found with practice he could differentiate between them: man, woman, horse, deer, rabbit, mouse. He could pinpoint each with ease. Right now, Ghost was stalking a deer which had no idea of the danger it was in. So John broke off their connection. He had found that when Ghost ate and they were connected, he too could taste the meal, and he really hated the taste of blood. "Where is he?" Jojen asked. "He's a few miles ahead of us. He's caught a deer," John said. "The connection with him is... It's still as easy?" "Aye, with the others it takes a little while. With Ghost it's instant. It's like he's waiting for me," John said, smiling. It didn't take them long to reach the evidence of Ghost's kill. The deer carcass had been stripped, and laying to one side, looking mightily pleased with himself, was the not-so-white wolf. Luckily, they had passed a stream a mile or so back. John looked at the wolf, who did not want to follow, before he turned his horse to head to the stream. It took a moment for the reluctant wolf to move, but he did, and they set off. "We shouldn't be long, my lord." "Joe," John said to Jamie as he pointed towards the stream. "And the wolf?" And Jamie nodded. Loras rode up beside him, and they and their guards set off. The ride to the stream taking them but a few moments. Once they got there, it took him a much longer amount of time to get the wolf to jump into the water itself. The area they were in was not far from where the Mormonts would split off from their party to head to Bear Island, something John wasn't looking forward to. Jamie had been happier than ever since they left Castle Black, he and Daisy closer and more free with their affections. Knowing that they were getting closer to saying goodbye to each other, even if it was temporary, had seen the moods change the last day or two. There would be more than a moon before they saw each other again, and John feared that Jamie's mood would change for the worst without Daisy around. Though given the next time they'd meet, they'd be wed. Perhaps Jamie would bear it easier than John suspected. He was taken from his thoughts by the splashing of water, and then Ghost jumping excitedly, and then looked on in amazement at the large salmon Ghost had in his mouth. "Really, a deer not enough for you?" he said to the wolf, much to the amusement of Loras and the guards. "It would seem not," Loras cheeped, and they watched on as Ghost devoured the large fish. Once done, they hurried back to the others, not wanting to fall too far behind. They caught up with them just in time. It seemed as they had indeed reached the split-off point. Riding up beside the others, John and Loras dismounted and walked over to say their farewells for now to Daisy and her sisters, and for a little while longer to Jorah and Linesi. "My lady, my lord," John said as he reached Jorah. "Ah, John, we thought we might not get the chance to bid you farewell." Jorah said, "It's been a pleasure traveling with you, my lord, my lady. I look forward to seeing you again soon," John said. "Aye, you too, lad. Bear Island is most grateful for what you've done for her, as am I. I hope you visit one day." Jorah said, "I shall, my lord," John said before turning to Linesi. My lady, I wish you all the best health for you and the babe. I thank you, John, for everything. Essie said. Oh! John watched as she said her goodbyes to Laura's, giving her nephew a large hug and mussing his hair, which made them both giggle. He said his own goodbyes then to Lyra and Jory, both of them too, asking him to come visit Bear Island and saying that they'd see him in Winterfell. He saw Jamie and Daisy say their own farewells and turned away to allow them some privacy. When they were done, Daisy came over to him and whispered in his ear, "Look after him, will you?" "I will, my lady, always," John said, and she smiled at him before mounting her horse. John did likewise as soon as Jamie did. He thought of going over to speak to his lord, but decided not to. He knew by the look that Jamie was giving Daisy that right now he didn't wish for comfort from anyone but her. They stayed there for a few more minutes watching the Mormonts and their guards leave before turning off to head in the opposite direction. They were no more than a day away from Last Hearth according to the Smallgen, so should reach it on the morrow. Jamie, saying goodbye to Daisy had been hard, and had it been for longer than the moon or so, they'd be apart. He didn't know if he would have been able to do it. From the moment she'd agreed to be his wife, Jamie had found that he looked forward to his days just that little bit more, his company just that little bit more. If finding John had given him purpose, then finding Daisy had brought him happiness. For the first time in his life, it was as if both sides of his heart were truly beating. The man he'd wanted to be, Kingsguard, knight, honorable. Before meeting John, he assumed that man to be long dead and buried. But buried though he was deep inside him, the man wasn't dead. He was instead waiting to be reborn, and his king had made that happen. The man he never thought he could be. The one with a wife who loved him as much as he loved her. He too he had thought to be long dead, only to find that to be far from the truth. Years earlier he had said goodbye to a woman he thought he loved. He had been the one to ride off then, and at the time he had thought, this is how it feels. This is what it's like to leave the other side of your heart behind. How wrong he was. Saying goodbye to Cersei was nothing like this. Within moments of doing so, he'd forgotten about her and was thinking more of the adventure he was undertaking. Saying goodbye to Daisy, though. It will only be a moon or so, Jamie, and then we'll be wed. Daisy said softly, "What if I can't go a moon without you?" Jamie said with a small smirk, though there was some truth in his words, "Then, my lord, we are done for." Daisy said, kissing him softly, "I love you. I love you too." He looked to his side to see Ghost had joined him, which in turn had meant the Smallgen suddenly felt the need to ride elsewhere. Laughing, he nodded to the wolf and they continued to ride on. After riding through a forest, they came to the Umber homestead. Last Hearth stood atop a small mountain which you had to ride a circular path to reach the keep itself. As he looked at it in the distance, he felt it was an excellent defensive position. This keep wouldn't fall easily, and certainly not by surprise. "My lord," John said, riding towards him with Loras. John, Loras. "That path looks tricky," Loras said. Loras said, "Not really," John said, pointing to Ghost, who was racing up ahead of them. "Well, we better not keep Lord Umber waiting," Jamie said, and they set off towards the path. Loras was right. It was tricky. Some parts were slick. While it was large enough for horses to ride four abreast, they found quickly the edges were far too dangerous, and so they rode single file. Though it didn't seem to bother the Smallgen or the Umber men as they rode as normal, Ghost too had no problem with the path. When they reached the keep itself, Jamie was far less impressed. While old and definitely sturdy Last Hearth was probably the least welcoming place he'd ever seen, and that included Castle Black. The walls were dark and gray and covered in snow and ice. The doors, though big and imposing, were made of a dark wood, which only reinforced the overall darkness of the keep itself. It looked cold, and seeing the three large men in the household ready to welcome them, were all dressed in big furs. Jamie knew it would be. As for the Umbers themselves, the Great John was an absolute beast of a man. Though not a lot taller than his son, in sheer size he was far bigger. The other two men were equally as big. One was wearing an eye patch and was dressed in a white bear cloak, which had, as its hood, the bear's head. The other man was thinner and more gaunt, with a snowy white beard and dark eyes. Jamie looked to the large lord, who was looking at him distrustfully, and then back to John, who in turn did not look happy about the Great John's expression. He smiled and dismounted, and was immediately joined by John, Loris, and Ghost, who caused a stir. "Is that? It can't be. A direwolf," Great John said loudly. "Aye, father, that's John's wolf." "Snow, come here, lad. Let me look at you," Great John said, and John stepped forward. "Aye, a stark true and true. Be welcome at last, hearth lad." The Great John set a large smile on his face. "I thank you, my lord. May I introduce Lord Jamie Lannister?" John said, and Jamie moved forward. "Lord Umber, I thank you for your hospitality." "Aye, welcome, Lord Lannister." The Great John's greeting much less friendly. "Lord Loris Tyrell," John said, and the Great John turned to meet Loris and welcomed him a little better. "Lord Jojen and Lady Mira Reed." John introduced both the Reed children, and they got the same welcome John did. "I know your father well, a fine man," the Great John boomed happily. "Thank you, my lord." A woman came out holding a tray with some bread and salt on it, and Jamie smirked. Well, if nothing else, he'd not be getting murdered here, he thought as he took a piece of each. "Well, come. We'll show you to your rooms, and we'll feast tonight, Lord Jamie Snow," the Great John said before he and all the rest of the Umbers quickly went inside. While still not comforting, the inside was far better, and thankfully far warmer than the outside. They were shown to some quite decent rooms, and he was glad to see his own had a fire already roaring in the hearth. John and Loris joined him after leaving their chests in their own rooms. They would only stay here a day or so, though, all of them eager to make the journey to Winterfell. "Not exactly friendly, is he?" Loris said. "No, this is the North Loris. They don't think highly of Southerners," John said. "The Mormonts weren't like that. Even the Smallgen was far friendlier," Loris said, and Jamie laughed. "Aye, they know us, Loris. The Northmen don't trust what they don't know. Isn't that right, John?" "It is, my lord, which is why I was wondering if I should speak to the Great John myself." "Why, I think the trade deal will go better coming from me. It was the same with the Manderleys, my lord." "Very well. You know the details better than I anyway," Jamie said, getting a laugh. "That's because you only like playing with your sword, my lord." "So," John japed. "Why you? Who said that?" Jamie said in mock outrage. "3 guesses," John said. "It was my aunt, wasn't it?" "Aye, my lord," John said, and this time they all laughed a little. "Loris had better get some rest, don't you think, my lord?" "What, I'm not tired," Loris said grumpily. "Loris, you're about to have to suffer through a proper northern feast. Trust me, you will be," Jamie said, causing John to laugh loudly. John. Walking through the Umber Keep with a large white direwolf, was John found out a good way to make sure you were not disturbed or bothered. The servants avoided him, the guards moved to one side, and John was free to walk all the way to where he assumed the Great John's solar was. Given the shouts coming from inside the room, he had found the right place. "What were you thinking, boy?" "I was thinking the trade deal we were being offered was too good to turn down." "You think I care for coin? I think we could use the damn thing. Not enough to get in bed with the damn Kingslayer, we can't." He's a good man, Father. He's marrying Daisy Mormont. What other Southerner you think would do that? I don't know or care what the hell the Mormonts are thinking, though I'm sure Mage will have something to say about it. You brought the damn Kingslayer to my homeboy. John had enough. He moved to the door, and the guard tried to stop him only for Ghost to knock him off his feet. Once he did, John pushed the door open to the shock of the men inside the room. Snow, what are you doing? The Great John shouted as he stood up. How dare you, my lord? You speak of a man you know nothing about, a man who's done more for the North than any Southerner has ever done before him. You speak of him in such a way. What of honor, my lord? Where is the honor of speaking of a guest in such a manner? You're speaking of the Kingslayer Snow. Ah, it is not your place. Not my place, my lord. I know the man better than any of you here. I know how much he's helped the North, how much he's done for it. He comes here to offer to help you too, and your stubborn pride blinds you to old prejudices. Try. He broke his oath. Snow. An oath to a mad king. My lord, a mad king who, I may remind you, killed my grandfather and uncle. Your liege lord and his heir, or have you forgotten my lord? I have not forgotten. I will never forget. Yet the man who brought justice to my family for their deaths is treated with such disrespect. I will not stand for it, my lord. Myself and my companion shall take our leave. I have no desire to share a hall with you, my lord, not after this. John turned and walked away, leaving the men in shock. He stormed back to his room and slammed the door behind him when he entered. Ghost stood beside him and brushed against him, and yet even rubbing his hand in his wolf's fur could not calm the rage John felt. Jamie deserved not only their respect, but their gratitude. Yet they were too closed-minded to see it. Men like the Great John weren't fit to carry Jamie's sword. As he pushed the clothes he'd taken out of the chest back inside it, Loras entered the room, seeing his friend's distress. He quickly walked over to John, who still hadn't calmed. John, what's wrong? Loras asked concernedly. These men, these foolish men, it's no wonder the North is thought so badly in the South. It's full of closed-minded fools. What happened? They disrespected Jamie. These fools who aren't worth even one part of him. Disrespected a far better man than any of them could even dream of being. John said angrily. John, you knew they would. Is that not why you went to speak to them yourself? Aye, it is, but Loras, John said as he sat down resignedly. How did you leave it? Loras asked. I told them we were leaving, John said. John, we can't. It's getting on. It'll be dark soon. We have to stay. I know, John said, shaking his head. Wait here, Loras said, and John nodded while he left the room. John sat on the bed and felt himself grow embarrassed. Had he overreacted? Did he go too far? He had felt such rage, such anger when he heard them speak of Jamie that way. But was he right to? Would it not have been better to show a different side, to stay calm and persuade? He wasn't sure what was the right thing to do. Standing up for Jamie was, though. Of that he was certain. But perhaps he should have done it differently. Loras came back a few minutes later with Jamie and John. Couldn't look him in the eye. He had let him down. He felt it keenly as Jamie sat down on the bed beside him, not a word spoken, and just an arm placed around his shoulder. He closed his eyes to stop the onset of tears, not wanting to cry in front of Loras and Jamie. Not for this. Not now. You know I'm supposed to be the impulsive one with a temper, right? Jamie said, and he laughed. Aye, well, I did learn from you after all, John said to more laughter. You think we should leave? Jamie asked. No, Loras was right. We have to stay. We can leave on the morrow. Fine. I'll go talk to the great John. My lord? John asked. It's fine, John. Leave it to me, Loras, Jaime said, and he nodded. He watched as Loras and Jaime left the room and then went to lay down on the bed. He was supposed to be the one who smoothed things over in the north, and instead he'd made things worse. Now Jaime and Loras would have to go and apologize for his behavior and hope the Great John allowed them to stay. Everything he'd said to the Great John had been right. He'd been right to say it, and yet he'd been a fool too for not thinking more clearly about the consequences of the simple loss of control he'd had. Loras. Seeing how angry John was had been a surprise to Loras. He'd not seen his friend that way before, but it was no surprise it had been because of Lord Jaime that he'd lost his temper. John and he were a lot alike in certain respects, and especially when it came to people they cared about. He also knew that Lord Jaime's relationship with John was even closer than his own with the Lord. He had wondered if they were doing the best thing to leave him alone in his room, but Jaime had reassured him, and so now they were walking to meet Lord Umber. He didn't know what to expect from the Lord of Last Hearth when they arrived today. All John had told him was the Great John was a typical Northman. When he'd asked Jojen and Mira what that meant, they said loud, proud, and prone to anger. When they reached the Sola, they found two guards who looked at them both oddly before checking behind them, and then a moment later they were brought in to see Lord Umber. My lord, Jaime said. Lord Jaime, the Great John replied. I believe I owe you an apology, my lord, Jaime said. My lord? The Great John looked at them both before looking to his son and the other thinner man with the beard they'd met earlier. Hothar, he thought his name was. For my squire's behavior, Jaime said. No, my lord, you do not. Young Snow spoke truly, and harsh though it was, he was right to do so, the Great John said to both Jaime and his surprise. My lord, I don't understand, Jaime said. I spoke out of turn. Lord Jaime, the lad corrected me fiercely, I may add. Great John said, a smile now on his face. According to my son, his wolf's just as fierce. He laughed loudly. Aye. That is true, my lord, Jaime said with a snigger. I congratulate you, my lord, on your upcoming wedding. Lady Dacey's a fine woman. That she is my lord, Jaime said, smiling, which made the Great John smile too. We shall feast tonight, my lord, to your upcoming wedding, and to our new trade deal. We shall, my lord, Jaime said, and the Great John nodded to a guard who sent a woman in carrying some ale to the Lannisters and the Umbers. The Great John said, grabbing a mug. The Umbers and the Lannisters, Jaime said, and the Great John laughed, while both men did their best to empty the mugs quickly, something which they managed within a moment of each other. Leaving the room after Jaime and the Great John had another mug of ale and laughed about a tourney that Jaime had won, he and Jaime headed down the corridor and walked back towards their own. Loras walked silently beside Jaime, who was at times shaking his head and at times laughing a little. When they got to John's room and checked in on him, he was asleep, so he and Jaime walked back to Jaime's room, and once inside, Loras could bear it no more. What just happened, my lord? Loras asked. Northmen. Loras, they're a different breed. Don't ever forget that. Aye, my lord. I know, but I don't understand. John, in standing up to the Great John, actually impressed the man. He made him think, almost as if the man was waiting for him to do so. Jaime said, You're right, my lord. Northmen are odd, Loras said, and Jaime laughed loudly. Now go get some rest. John was right earlier. A northern feast is much different. Loras did as he was told and went back to his room, though he wasn't tired in the least. Instead, he lay down on his bed and just waited. Eventually, though, he did doze off for an hour or two and was woken up by knocking on his door. Getting up and walking to it, he found the serving girl carrying some water in a jug. and some towels at the door when he opened it. He quickly took the things and washed himself to get ready for the upcoming feast. It was while doing so that John knocked before entering. "Are you all right?" Loras asked. "Aye, Loras, I am. Jamie told me what happened with the Great John. I got lucky," John said. "Well, sometimes it's good to be lucky, is it not?" Loras smirked as he finished readying himself. "Come on. We'll need to find a nice Umber lass for you to dance with." John Japed and Laura shook his head. "You're the dancer, John. I'll sit and watch." Finishing up, they left the room and headed to meet up with Mira, Jojen, and Jamie, finding the two Reeds already ready and waiting, but having to wait a little longer for Jamie. When he did appear, all 5 of them followed a servant down to the main hall to find the feast had already begun. It seemed the Umbers didn't care too much for ceremony, which actually Loras found he really liked, as the introductions to these things usually went on for as long as the feasts themselves. They were escorted to different tables, the Umber High table for Jamie and the one directly below it for John, himself, and the Reeds. Sitting at the table were a couple of younger boys and one girl of around Mira's age. As they took their seats, the feast both began in earnest, and the introductions were made first by the Great John, and then to each other around the table. "Ku you I et," the Great John's voice boomed out. "That's better. Now, if I may introduce our guests for this feast, Lord Jaime Lannister, the Warden of the West and a friend of the Umbers." The Great John shouted loudly, and Loras heard mugs banged on table and saw John looking surprised. "Jon Snow, son of our liege lord and friend of the Umbers," the Great John added and motioned for John to stand up. "Lord Loras Tyrell, friend of the Umbers. Lord Jojen Reed, Lady Mira Reed, friend of the Umbers." The Great John continued, and the banging grew louder. "I bid you all welcome to Last Hearth, and offer you meat and mead and a warm place to stay, should ever the need arise. My lords, my lady, the Umbers wish you well." The Great John finished to loud cheers. John looked almost as shocked as he himself was feeling. He knew they'd smoothed things over with the man earlier, but Loras hadn't expected such a warm welcome as this and couldn't help but smile at the look on John's face. Though the smile was soon wiped from his own when the girl sitting to his right began making the introductions. "May I introduce my brothers and myself? I am Liara Umber, my brothers Hoarfrost and Brandon," the large girl said with a smile which Loras did his best to return. Her 2 brothers looked to be even younger then. John and he and yet were already of a size with them, while Liara was a good half a head taller than he was and was heavier built than either he or John. He did find, though, that her company was far different than the southern ladies, and while he danced with her eventually, it was actually fun, as she seemed to have no interest in him whatsoever. Instead, it was Jojen who received most of her real attention, much to Mira's glee. Jamie, if meeting with Lord Umber earlier didn't show the man liked his ale, then sitting at a feasting table with him certainly did. Jamie had barely finished one while the man had emptied at least 3, as he was going for the 4th, though his son stood up and called John over. "John, come here." Small John shouted and stayed standing when John came over. "My lord," John said as he arrived at the table, a look of apprehension on his face. "These fools don't believe me about the ice, John." The Small John sniggered. "Aye, a foolish idea. Snow, who'd want ice and why?" Moore said, his eye patch now gone and replaced with what looked to be a shiny black rock. "Can you get me some ice, my lord?" John said, looking to a curious Great John. "Aye, ice we have plenty of, Snow," the man replied, sending a servant to grab a chunk of ice. While around them the feast was still going on, Jamie noticed a fair few eyes were looking up at the high table. John stood there and waited, and within a few moments the servant came back carrying a large chunk of ice which he placed on the table. "See, worthless," the Great John said, while both he and the Small John smirked. John took out a small knife and began to chip away at the ice, knocking small pieces off of it. When he was satisfied, he reached out for an empty mug and placed the ice inside before asking for and receiving a jug of ale, which he poured over the ice. "My lord, drink slowly," John said, and the room erupted in laughter as the great John's own boomed out. "It's a hard task you're setting me, lad, but I'll try." The great John set to even more laughter. Jamie watched as the great John took a small, unsure sip of the ale. Before taking a larger one, he looked on as the smile appeared on the man's face and watched as he held the mug almost reverently in his hand. "You need to try this," he said loudly while John chipped more ice and placed it in more mugs. Soon, more and more people were looking for ice to be added to their drinks. The servants were sent scurrying off to find some more, and people began chipping the ice themselves and adding it. It was a few minutes later when the great John shouted loudly, my head, it hurts," he shouted as the small John doubled over in laughter. "He told you to drink slowly, father," Small John said to loud cheers. After the pain in the man's head had gone away, John was asked to explain more about the ice trade and what it could do for the North. He could see the great John's eyes light up when John said he'd figured out how to move it, something he had shown him while they were in Castle Black. After that, the rest of the night passed, pretty much without incident, until Ghost showed up. Where the wolf had been, he didn't know, nor how it made it into the hall without being seen. But hearing the almost woman-like scream from the great John, when the wolf's head appeared out of nowhere from behind him, just to help himself to a leg of chicken from his plate, was something he'd smile about for a long time. John came and grabbed the wolf away, though the leg of chicken, much to the great John's annoyance it seemed, was the price of the wolf's compliance. With John bidding his good nights, soon Loris and the Reeds did likewise, and if Jamie had been a fool, he'd have expected that to signal the winding down of the feast. However, that was certainly not the case in the North. Instead, it ramped it up. The great John actually sang, and Jamie was stunned to learn the man had a pretty good voice, particularly if the song was a sad one, it seemed. His last memory of the night was when at some point an argument between the great John and his son had broken out over something or other. It led to the two men stripping off their shirts and wrestling in the middle of the floor. Who won Jamie would never know, as when he woke up half-dressed laying on his bed the next morning, he could barely remember much of the evening after that point. He dressed, washed, and staggered to the hall to break his fast to find some others in the same condition as he was, though the great John was as loud and boisterous as ever. "Ah, good of you to join us, Lord Jamie. Good morning, my lord." The morning's conversation passed him by. Truth be told, he heard John speak of shipping the ice and thought he heard something about the Bay of Seals, but beyond that, not very much at all. After eating, they quickly began their preparations to leave. Winterfell was at least 2 weeks away, and they wished to have full days of travel to make it as quickly as they could. It didn't take too long for them to be ready to set off. Without the extra supplies and the carts, they were able to travel a lot faster, though they still stopped regularly to rest up. "I bid you all a safe travel, my lord. I wish I could come with you to Winterfell, but I have things I must do here. However, I shall do my best, so that either I or my son arrive in time to see you wed," the great John said as they lined up to say their goodbyes. "I thank you, Lord Umber, for your welcome and hospitality. I look forward to our business together," Jamie replied. "I too, my lord, Jon Snow." "It was good to meet you, lad, though I dare not say the same about the White Wolf." Both the great John and the small John looked warily at Ghost, who basically ignored them. "I thank you, my lord, and I apologize for my words," John said, and the great John just smiled. "You're a wolf, John. Wolves don't apologize," the great John said, slapping him hard on the back. "Now be off with you all. You should make it to the King's Road before the snows hit." As it turned out, they barely did, and once back on the King's Road, they quickly found a shaded place to make camp for the night, not really wanting to have to do so during a snowstorm. The storm itself lasted for 2 days, keeping them where they'd made camp, and they were thankful that they had done so close to a stream. John. Daily travel along the road was dull and boring, he thought. They had settled into a routine, up early to break their fast, travel until luncheon and stop off for an uncooked meal before settling for a place to make camp each night. Some days they were lucky and found a place for their campsite early. When they did, they'd stop their travel for the day. Others, though, they hadn't found a suitable place and traveled much further to do so. John hated those days. When they'd eventually find somewhere, it'd be near dark, and setting up tents and preparing meals always seemed rushed, and even the sleep those nights didn't refresh them. He also found that those nights he dreamt less. He didn't get to visit Rainey's, and they added to his bad moods when he woke of a morning. It would take him a number of hours to feel better when he didn't see or speak to his sister. He also found he couldn't warg as easily, as if his mind was troubled more those days. After the nights he did dream of Rainey's, he found himself waking far happier, far more refreshed. His warging seemed to not only occur easier, but he found he could do more with it. A day ago he and Jojen had practiced with a bird. He had spent the night before walking around the caves below the Dragon Mount with Rainey's, exploring the island of their ancestors even more. When Jojen suggested they warg into birds, John hadn't been interested. But what Jojen said next really intrigued him. Why don't we try and reach out, John? Picture a place and see if we can find a bird near there. How will we see them if they're so far away? He asked. We reach out, John. The book said, it can be done. We don't need to see with anything other than our third eye. Our what? Our mind, John, Jojen said as Loris laughed. Despite his skepticism, he did as Jojen suggested. It took him longer than usual, but he found a gull, and after a while he was inside. Its mind. He had pictured the volcano in his head, and next thing he knew, he could see them in the air. Lots of them. Picking one out, he reached out and it welcomed him. The connection felt different though. Looser, almost like a fishing line resting in the water. He felt if he pulled on it, he'd lose it, so he let it stay the same. Flying over and seeing the castle itself, he found what he saw was both, just like it had been in his dreams with Rainey's, and not the same. It seemed darker, more foreboding. And as he looked at the banners and flags, he could see why. The stag didn't belong here. He looked down on men walking his family's towers, his family's parapets, and without even thinking it, he felt the gull release its bowels and watched on as the contents landed directly on a stag banner. John, Jojen asked as he opened his eyes. It worked, John said, smiling. John, your nose, Loris said, handing him a piece of cloth to wipe the blood. Are you all right? I feel fine. It worked, Loris. Jojen, it worked. It did. Where did you go? Jojen asked. Dragonstone. For the rest of the day he had a terrible headache, and he had wondered if it was his age, his strength, or did he need more practice to allow him to do so without being hurt? Or was this the price for going beyond what he should? He waited another couple of days to warg again, and once again tried the same thing, which led to another discovery. Are you sure, John? Loris asked. It'll be fine. Besides, if it does hurt again, I'll know, won't I? All right, just be careful, Loris said, and he smiled at his friend's concern. Reaching out, he found himself once again over Dragonstone, and as he looked above for gulls to warg into, he noticed something strange. One gull seemed different, almost brighter than the others. John reached for it and prepared to have the conversation to allow him enter, only he found the door open. When he entered, he found the reason why. This was a place he'd been before. This was the same gull. This time the bond was even tighter. Still, not as tight as one with an animal closer, but tighter all the same. So excited was he by the discovery that he found himself staying longer within the gull, and when he landed on some rock, it was only then he broke the connection. Coming back to the others, he opened his eyes and found Loris looking worriedly at him. Though this time, to his relief, there was no blood coming from his nose. He explained what he'd found to Jojen. and they tried to make sense of it, but couldn't. Later that day he found, though he had a headache, it was far lesser than the one previous. It was a little over a week and a half into their journey that they were joined by a company of stark men. John recognized Jory, Alin, and Wael amongst them, and was happy to see them, though surprised they had come to meet them. As they drew closer, though he saw the relief in the men's eyes and wondered if something had happened. Of course, that was when Ghost decided to make his appearance, and after the horses calmed down and the men realized the wolf was with him, the questions began. "Is that a dire wolf?" Aelin asked. "Aye, it's Ghost. He's harmless, aren't you, fella?" John said, and ignored the sniggers behind him. "You're harmless," Loras snorted. "Whoa! Lord Jaime, Lord Stark sent us to escort you to Winterfell. We expected you earlier?" Jory said. "We stopped Oven Last Hearth for a day and got caught up in a storm, so stopped traveling." "No other problems, my lord?" Jory asked. "No, it was uneventful," Jaime answered. "It's no good to see you, lad," Jory said, then smiling at him. "You too, Jory, you're faring well?" "I am." "You look well too, lad," Jory said, and John nodded in agreement. Once they joined them, they continued traveling for the rest of the day. They were no more than 3 days out, and when they camped that night, Jory brought him up to date on what he'd missed while he'd been away. He told him of his new brother and of Arya and Sansa. When pressed on Robb, he wouldn't say much, though John noticed the look which appeared on his and Alan's face. "You'll be looking forward to seeing your father again, no doubt," Jory said, and John nodded while Loras and Jaime looked uncomfortable, and Mira and Jojen smiled at him reassuringly. "Aye, I'm looking forward to seeing them all, Jory," John said, smiling, and received a warm smile from the man in return. Going to bed that night, John felt a little worried about how things would go once he did get back to Winterfell. How would his uncle react? How his wife would. He looked forward to seeing his siblings again, though. As he took the egg out of the chest and lay back in the bed, he hoped he'd get along with them as much as he did with Rhaenys. He thought of his sister as he fell asleep, hoping to meet her in his dreams again. He found her today walking by some water pools in a bright garden. She beckoned him to join her as she sat down and placed her feet in the water. His sister had grown into a poised and beautiful young lady. Her hair was long and dark, and it rested on her bare shoulders, her dark skin contrasting with it perfectly. Her purple eyes were dark and mysterious, he thought, but to him, they were always welcoming, friendly, and they sparkled when she saw him. As he sat beside her, he could see the contented smile on her face. She looked at peace. She looked happy, and he was grateful for it. When he had found her again, she told him he had left her alone, left her with no one to speak to. Mother and father and Egg were gone. She said it was only her alone, and then he had left her too. He had promised never to leave her alone again, and so far had been able to live up to that promise. "Where are we, Ray?" "The water gardens. Mother and father brought me here once. Balerion and I played over there in the water, though he didn't like being splashed," Rhaenys said, laughing. "We could have come here often then," Jay asked. "We could Che? You? Me, Egg, Danny, this, all of us playing with my uncle's children. Do you think they'd have liked me, your uncles?" Jay asked. "I like you, so they would had to, or else I wouldn't like them, Jay," Rhaenys said, and Jay nodded. They stayed there for a while, laughing and joking. At one point, Jay had jumped into the water and pulled Rhaenys in after him. Her retribution had been swift and merciless, as she had splashed him repeatedly until he could barely breathe, before finally giving him respite. "Now see what happens," she said, looking sternly at him before breaking into laughter. He loved these parts of the dreams, but as he saw the dark clouds gather, he feared the next part, as always, though she was there right beside him, her hand in his, and they waited for the sky to darken completely and the visions to begin. He saw a large dog protect a baby dragon, while all around it, people tried to poke it with pointed sticks. He saw a beast with the body of a lion and a scorpion's tail being caught in a net while blinded by a shining star. He saw a snake lie, crumbled and broken, under a large rock, and a wolf break free from the chains that held it down. He saw his sister look at him and smile while above them a dragon flew free in the sky. He felt the hand that held him fade away, and as he looked to see Rhaenys he found himself alone, but for a white wolf, until the dragon landed and looked at him with dark purple eyes. He woke up in a cold sweat and tried to make sense of what he'd seen. He took out the small book he used for notes and quickly wrote down what he'd dreamt, marking the where and when of it all. The book had other dreams, one from the wall and another from last hearth. It had a couple he'd had on the road, some he'd been able to figure out, some not yet. But he knew from his talks with Jojen that these were important. Rhaenys had told him that too, though he knew not why they were so. He dressed quickly and broke his fast with the others. Jory sent Alan and Weil on to Winterfell to announce they'd arrive on the morrow, and they quickly set off for the day. He looked forward to being in a room again, to be somewhere safe and warm. He wished to read his father's letters, and had not done so but briefly when his uncle had given them to him. The thoughts of the letters being damaged or lost had led him to leave them, tied and locked up tight at the bottom of his chest. They were far too precious to him, and so he wouldn't risk them during travel. "I can't wait to spar again," Laura said, taking him out of his thoughts. Me too," Jon said, as they readied themselves for the final part of their journey. The rest of the day and the night itself passed quickly. They rode, and Ghost looked out longingly at the Wolfswood, and Jon told him he'd be allowed there soon, which seemed to keep him happy enough for now. It was on the following day that he saw it. For the first time in years, they crested a hill, and there in the distance it stood. "Winterfell," Jon said softly. "Be